Lori, are we still waiting for a few folks?
I just got the streaming going, so let me,
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Trying to get.
When will Kevin participate, Yelena and Becky? I don't see him.
He's not going to be able to join us this morning.
Okay.
He lives in Denver, so your 7:45 a.m. meeting's kind of a killer.
Yeah.
I took pity on him and said, I can play Kevin for a while. So don't ask me anything really complicated.
I think, Lazaro, we're all set to begin in terms of participation.
So let's call the meeting to order. Good morning, everybody. Let me go over just some quick guidelines for our online meetings here. Second. Welcome to the May 16th regular meeting of the West Hartford Pension Board. My name is Lazaro Guzman, and I'm the chair of the board. This meeting is being conducted in a virtual format in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act as amended by Public Act number 21-2, which authorizes municipalities to conduct public meetings virtually. Members of the public can view the meeting live on West Hartford Community Television at www.whctv.org and www.youtube.com/WHCTV5. The meeting is also being recorded for on-demand viewing and will be available on the town's website for at least 45 days. Since we're conducting this meeting in a virtual format, there are some special rules and procedures that I need to cover before we begin. First, I ask all participants to mute your device when you're not speaking. If you wish to be recognized, please raise your hand and I will call on you in the order I see hands raised. If you're participating by audio only or I do not call on you and the debate is ending, then unmute your phone and let me know so that I can recognize you. Second, main motions will be made by me and no second is necessary. We will proceed immediately to debate. These include motions to adopt, receive, or approve business items. Subsidiary motions still require a second. These include motions to amend. A member must be recognized before making a subsidiary motion, but any member can second the motion by just unmuting their line and saying second. Third, all speakers must make a good faith effort to state the person's name and title at the outset of each occasion that such person participates in the meeting. Fourth, all votes must be taken by roll call unless the vote is unanimous. Fifth, a reminder that if any participant has a problem with connectivity, you should immediately call Lori Kearney, whose number you were provided earlier. She will let me know and we will recess the meeting while the problem is resolved. If it cannot be resolved quickly, we will ask you to call into the meeting using a phone and participate via audio only. Those are all of my initial comments. Lori, please take the roll call.
Thank you. This is Lori Kearney. Roll call for today. Lazaro Guzman.
Present.
Perry Salonia. I see Perry, but Perry, are you there? I can't hear you. Perry Salonia.
Let's come back to Perry maybe.
Al Ebo.
Here.
Brittany McGilpin. Here. Peter Privitera.
Here.
Mayor Cantor.
Here.
Rick Ledwith.
Here.
Chris Kachmar.
Here.
Mary Fay. Cathy Lombardi.
I'm here.
Yelena Pelletier.
Here.
Becky Sielman.
Here.
And as discussed, Kevin Hart is not participating today. And Perry, are you here? Okay, all right, Perry's here. Thanks, Lazaro. You're all set.
All right, thanks, Lori. Next up on the agenda, election of the clerk of the board. Lori, am I handling that one?
I think so. Just for the participants' information, Paula, we had elected Paula clerk of the board at last meeting. In that time, it's been a whirlwind for her. She's sold her house and moved out of state. And so we do need another clerk of the board.
So I'll make a motion to elect Lori Kearney as clerk of the board. And actually,
I think last time we didn't need a formal vote for this.
Okay.
We didn't take a formal vote. So if
Got it. So it's just okay. So we can move forward.
so, I'm happy to take on the role. Thank you.
Welcome back. All right, next on the agenda, we've got Peter Privitera, Director of Finance, and he's got a couple agenda items, the valuation and then the MARC pension administration system.
Thank
Peter?
you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Today we have Becky, Sielman, and Yelena Pelletier from Milliman. You all were provided a copy of the valuation, and I've asked Becky and Yelena to do just a quick overview of the valuation because this is our first valuation with the addition of the pension obligation bond proceeds. So we should be well funded, Becky. And the second part of the presentation is on a pension administration system that was developed by Milliman. The administration was given a presentation of this system, and it's basically a unique system that allows us to track and also to project pension liabilities for individuals, for employees, and with the departure of Paula Kanacki, who basically was doing all of the most of the pension calculations for the prospective retirees, we thought it might be a good time to have the board be introduced to this system and discuss the possibility of us acquiring or leasing the software of this system, because not only will it help us in projecting pension liabilities, but every year as part of the pension valuation, we have to provide Milliman a number of different areas of information, including employee accounts and any changes in the pension and union contracts. All this would be part of this system, so it would be a lot easier for exchange of information. So Becky, I'm going to turn it over to you and Yelena now for your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. And would you like us to start first with the valuation results or the administration system?
I think just a quick overview of the valuation would probably be best. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to share our summary of the valuation results. I hope you can see that up on your screens. And I will just page through it. This is just first a little information about us, but let's get to you. First is information about the population covered by the valuation. And as you know, historically, we have done full valuations only in odd numbered years. So you can see every other year we have updated information about members covered by the plan. Overall, the number of members in 2021 looks comparable to 2019, but there was actually a huge amount of movement under the hood, if you will. There were 100 individuals who retired from active status, which actually was exactly what we expected. You have a lot of people that are eligible for retirement, and a lot of people took advantage of that. And when you think about that volume of calculations of people being put into pay status, we'll come back to that when we talk about administration systems. In addition to 100 people.
Excuse me for interrupting. Is this part of our package, or is this a separate exhibits that you have here?
I hope it's part of the package.
Excuse me, I sent out the valuation that Peter provided. It was with the email invite, or actually I should say the agenda materials. So it was attached, the valuation was.
The valuation report is, we'll email this separately. In fact, Yelena, while I'm talking, if you don't mind just forwarding it to the group while we're talking, that would
Yeah.
be great.
I mean, I have the valuation package, but I don't see this.
So this is a special, just a 6 or 7 page summary of the valuation results. So we're not going to walk through every page of the valuation report.
Oh, okay.
This is the information, the key information. So in this 2-year period, we had 100 people retire. We had another 52 people leave active status, but they're not necessarily retired. They're eligible for future benefits, or they've received a refund of their contributions. And there were 119 new employees who entered the plan. With the retirees we had 100 new retirees, but we had 86 existing retirees pass away during that 2-year period. That's a little bit heavier than we were expecting. Based on our actuarial assumptions, we would have expected something like 74 or 75 deaths. So 86 was a little bit more than expected, but remember, of course, that this is the period that includes the pandemic, and especially the early months of the pandemic. And so having somewhat more deaths than expected is kind of par for the course, if you will. We also had, and I'd like to give a shout out to the administration team, we had, they undertook an initiative to search for whether any beneficiaries of retirees who had elected contingent annuitant forms of payment, if those beneficiaries were still alive or dead, and identified 14 who had passed away. Well, that matters when we measure the liability. If we think that someone has a beneficiary that will receive benefits after the member's death, that's a more expensive benefit. That's a higher liability. Whereas if we know that the benefit is just payable for the member's remaining lifetime, that's a lower liability. And so identifying these 14 individuals as having previously passed away saved about $130,000 in liability. So it highlights why we will always encourage you to make sure you are doing those activities that keep the census data clean and complete. In the middle of the page, you can see a little bit more information about the active membership. I always need reminders on the letters and numbers for your plan, but B1 are the dispatchers, Part C are fire, Part D is police, Part E is most all of your newer employees in the last decade, and Part B is kind of everybody else that was hired longer ago. It's an interesting demographic profile. For many public pension plans in Connecticut that have been closed to new members, the population of active participants is increasingly old, which would be ages top to bottom, services left to right. And for many pension plans, it's an increasingly elderly long service population. You've got quite a young, both young in terms of age and short service population covered by this pension plan. And then
Can I ask a quick, Becky?
Sure, go ahead.
Maybe this is more for us, but I would think part of the process is an ongoing check of, making sure that retirees in pay status are still living, and then also before cutting any checks to beneficiaries, that there's a similar check on contingent beneficiaries. I guess when you made that comment, I wasn't sure if you were insinuating that that's not part of the normal process.
This is when someone retires, you may be making sure that the beneficiary is alive. But say it's 5 or 10 years later, the member's been retired for 5 or 10 years. You don't routinely check to make sure that the beneficiary is still alive. You really only need to know when the member dies.
Right.
But if we know sooner than that the beneficiary has died, that will lower the liability.
Got it. Okay.
If I if I could interject also, this is Lori Kearney, Clerk of the Board. We use the service of an outside vendor, Lazaro PBI. So they're monitoring our retiree mortality. And several months back, I also had provided them with a listing of contingent annuitants that those retirees named. And so that was part of what Becky was discussing. So that's now routinely done with the contingent annuitants, part of that population that's being monitored.
Yeah, and that is, I will say, you know, that's an A+ thing to be doing. The vast majority of plans do not check on a routine basis that their retirees are living or dead, or they don't do it often enough so that when a retiree does die, there can be a many month lag before the pension plan knows about it, which is its own headache in trying to recover overpayments from their estate. But also it's virtually unheard of for people to be routinely checking that the beneficiaries of retirees are still alive.
Until the retiree passes. I get it now. Thanks.
Right.
Thanks for
Right.
clarifying.
Right. So here's just a little bit of information at the bottom of the page about your different members collectively in pay status, meaning they're receiving a monthly pension check. A little more than 1,000 retirees, ordinary retirees, and there are a handful of disabled retirees that qualified for this plan's disability pension, and then 149 beneficiaries of people who retired with a form of payment providing for benefits to a beneficiary, and those beneficiaries are still receiving benefits. And collectively, it's about $38 million being paid out a year in benefits. And on the next page, let's talk about the assets. And boy, was this a bright spot. This was a year where I wished I was Chris Kachmar, because you get to talk about these just stellar investment returns after you know, a quiet actually 4 years but the last 2 years were kind of, you know, ho-hum, and then we get this 30% return, which is wonderful. And then of course on top of that, you can see that the asset balance has more than doubled because you issued pension obligation bonds of just under $323 million. That happened right after the money didn't get received into the trust on June 30th. We've added in the proceeds on an accrual basis, and as part of the package of changes that the town adopted along with the pension obligation bond, we do, as you know from prior years, use an asset smoothing technique to dampen the impact of market volatility. But in conjunction with the pension obligation bond, what we would we reset the actuarial value of assets to equal the market value of assets. Going forward in time, we will continue to do the 5-year asset smoothing. And that's a really important component of helping control the volatility of the town's contribution to the pension plan. And some more information about probably the most important assumption we make as part of the valuation is the interest rate assumption. And this is just a pictorial representation of your target asset allocation. And we have different size bubbles corresponding with the amount of money in these different asset classes. And then they are charted according to their expected returns from top to bottom and the riskiness of those returns from left to right. So you've got this sort of well-diversified portfolio. You have some equities in the blue shades that are higher risk, higher return. You have this big pot of fixed income that in green that is lower risk, lower return. And we take all of this diversity of asset classes into account when we advise you on the interest rate assumption. We look at over the long time horizon at what we expect the portfolio to earn. You can see in a short time horizon, such as 5 years, there could be a wide range of compounded returns. But as we look at longer and longer time horizons, there's more time for good years and bad years to balance one another out. And we look at this 50th percentile number or median number when we weigh in on things you should think about with respect to the interest rate assumption. And you can see that this year, based on Milliman's capital market assumptions, rather, it's a little bit higher than what we shared with you 2 years ago at 6.6%. 2 years ago, we were looking at something just a shade lower at 6.5. Now, in conjunction with the pension obligation bond, we used quite conservative assumptions for that entire analysis, and included an interest rate assumption of 6.25%. So this year's valuation reflects a 6.25% interest rate assumption. And you can see based on this analysis that that is a bit lower than our long-term expected earnings for this portfolio. So you are in quite a conservative stance. And I'll also just note that this analysis assumes that your investments are entirely passive. We have not built in any margin for any additional returns that you might be expected to achieve if you have actively managed funds. So let me just pause there and see if there are any questions. All right, hearing none, I'll go on to the next page where we look at the funded status. The liabilities climbed a bit from 2020 to 21. Now, I said earlier we only do full valuations in odd numbered years, but in the even numbered years historically, we have done an interim valuation. We reflect the actual investments, but we just use an estimate of the liability figures. One of the things I strongly urge you to consider, particularly since you have now issued the pension obligation bonds, is doing full valuations every year. You have a liability of $600 million, and getting that measured accurately every year, I think, just makes sense. So the liability has grown, of course, from in that 1 year period from 531 million estimated at July 120 to 602 million actual at July 121. We expect, of course, liability to grow over time as active members continue to accrue benefits. So we expected this year's liability to end up at about 540 million before any changes of any kind. The liability was about $17 million higher than that. There were some sources of actuarial losses from changes in the member group from 2019 to 2021 from a variety of sources. So it's normal for the liability to be a little higher or a little lower than expected. In this case, it's a little higher than expected. There were very small plan changes. There were some increases in employee contribution rates for a couple of groups, and that lowered the accrued liability by $2,000. But yes, we measured it for you. The big thing happening with the liability, though, that causes most of the increase is that the interest rate dropped from 6.99% to 6.25%. And that increased the liability by about $45 million. And that's how we get from 531 to 601.8. In the middle of the page, we break down that liability by the different members of folks in the plan. The largest by far share of liability belongs to those members that are in pay status. You can see that the liability for active members has been bumping along at a relatively modest level. It would actually have declined a little bit from last year to this year, except that by dropping the interest rate assumption, we've increased the normal cost. And that change in the liability for active members parallels the gradual shift of active members from the older Part B, more generous benefits, to the more scaled back benefits that are earned by members in Part E. And then we get down to the unfunded accrued liability and the funded ratio, which compare the assets to liabilities. And of course, you've issued the pension obligation bond, which has virtually wiped out the unfunded accrued liability and put the plan at just about 100%. And we didn't hit it exactly on the mark for a couple of reasons. First, that the amount that you issued was based on the market value of assets in early April, projected to June 30th, and the actual change in the market value in that period didn't exactly hit what we were expecting. But more importantly, the amount of issuance was based on an estimate of liability from the 2019 valuation, and the actual liability was a little bit higher than we were expecting because of those liability losses. So we undershot the mark by $9 million. So the plan ended up at 98.5% funded, which is in actuarial terms really pretty darn close, particularly given that we had 2 years of liability gains or losses that couldn't be measured until after the issuance of the bonds.
Becky,
Yes.
first off, can you hear me? I tried to
Yes.
fix my microphone.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, this is Perry Solonia, pension board member. I have a question for you on the $17 million loss over the 2-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously you talked to it in pretty good detail so far, but I'm curious, over a 2-year span of time, that's roughly about 3% of a loss. So
Mm-hmm.
do you have a sense offhand for the sources of that loss? And
Yeah,
the reason why I ask is, in this 2-year span, there's obviously lots of assumptions that need to be met to be sort of on point, and some of them are offsetting. You might have retirement assumption result in some losses, and termination result in some gains, so you have some offsetting. But obviously 3% over 2 years seems a little bit higher, and I'm just curious if you have some idea as to what's really contributing to it.
Yeah, we do spend a lot of time behind the scenes analyzing the sources of gains and losses and making sure that they are legitimate and not, for instance, a data issue. In this 2-year span, the two biggest things, the first is there were some losses from retirements. Overall, the number of people retiring was exactly what we expected, but it's not just a function of how many people retired, it's at what ages did they retire. We have an assumption that different people, depending on what benefits they get, will retire at different points. We expect that some people will retire the moment they're eligible to, and other people will continue lingering on, into their ripe old age, and everybody else sort of in the middle. So at what age people retires matters. And then the final element is whether their pay when they retired was what we expected. And to the extent individuals can use any overtime or cash out unused sick and vacation days or things that are unexpected like that, it will move, their benefit will be somewhat different than what we were expecting. So overall, although the number of retirees was what we expected, the actual impact of retirement was somewhat of an increase in liability. And then the second component where we measured some losses is that we had some changes in data that overall resulted in more losses than gains. Every other year, of course, we get updated data, we ask questions, but sometimes things happen, things got misbucketed, people got misbucketed and they're subsequently corrected, or there might be changes in date of birth or date of hire or gender, or those sorts of things. And very often those sorts of things offset one another. As pension actuaries, we pray to Saint Offset, because very often they're things that both increase and decrease the liability. For instance, this year we did have $130,000 of a gain because Lori and her crew identified those 14 beneficiaries as having passed away. Does that answer your question, Perry?
Yes, it does. And Perry Solonia, pension board member. And I guess where I'm going is, over time, if these kinds of things persist, obviously we'd want to recalibrate assumptions. And I believe you had talked to us about that a couple of board meetings ago. But if there's some themes in the assumptions where we're consistently off in retirement, obviously we want to address that so that it doesn't become this slow deterioration of this funded status over time.
Right.
So that's my last comment on that.
Yeah, and I thank you. I appreciate that. That is part of why I strongly urge you to have valuations done every year, so that we can catch those things and reflect them in our numbers more frequently than every other year. And also why a formal experience study to measure patterns of turnover, retirements, pay increases is a very important component of doing due diligence on the liability side of the equation. You know, it's a $600 million number. Let's make sure that we're doing the small things that aren't very costly to ensure that when we update our measurement of that number, it's as good a number as we can produce for you. Okay, well, let's go back. Let's cycle on from funded status to finally putting everything together with the contribution. And here we're showing you the debt service for the pension obligation bonds, because it is part of what the pension plan costs the town. So the actuarially determined contribution, of course, has dropped significantly. You can see down in the lower picture that the past service cost, the paying off the unfunded liability, has dropped to quite a small number. You still have normal cost, which is the cost of benefits being earned by active members. And you have replaced essentially the past service cost with the debt service. The past service cost was a soft obligation to pay off the unfunded accrued liability over time. You were able to borrow at enormously favorable rates, but you now have that hard debt to pay off that pension obligation bond over time. But the overall impact, even with a much more conservative measure of liability, the town's overall cost is a couple $1 million lower than it had been in the prior fiscal year. And then finally, just because some of you want to see the numbers, not just pictures, here are all of the numbers. The 2020 interim valuation results are shown for comparison. And then we've shown you what the 2021, these valuation results would have looked like absent any changes. There were modest changes in the employee contribution rates. And then the pension obligation bond, along with some changes in the actuarial methods and assumptions. So had nothing been done, the actuarially determined contribution would have climbed modestly from 26.9 million to 27.5 million. Now, of course, you had a great year of investments, but pre-pension obligation bond, we were recognizing those market gains only gradually over a 5-year period. And there were some liability losses that dampened that just a little bit. But this is still a good result. We expect the actuarially determined contribution, all other things being equal, to raise a little bit. You can see that your bargained changes shaved a couple $100,000 off of the contribution. And then with the pension obligation bond, we've lowered the interest rate to 6.25%. You, of course, have substantially more assets than you did before. We tweaked the amortization period just slightly so it is synchronized with the period over which you're paying off the obligation bonds. And we have also incorporated a change in your funding policy, which is that if the plan gets modestly overfunded, rather than using that surplus to subsidize or completely offset the normal cost, you have agreed to continue paying the full normal cost until such time as the funded ratio is more than 150%. So you're deliberately building up a cushion against adverse experience. And that's designed to provide more budgetary stability. You also took last year's actuarially determined contribution, the 26.9 million, and rather than contributing it to the pension trust, you've put it into a reserve fund. And the reserve fund is conservatively invested. And you have a policy to use the reserve fund to pay a portion of the actuarially determined contribution in any year where adverse market performance might cause the actuarially determined contribution to go up by more than 5%. So you've built in several layers of protection, protecting the operating budget, the town's operating budget, from too much volatility in the pension contribution. And this is the chief concern of a well-funded or modestly overfunded pension plan. That's a great place to be. It's so much better than being 40% funded. But with a well-funded or modestly overfunded plan comes contribution volatility. So as part of the pension obligation bond package, we've introduced several mechanisms that are designed to help protect the town's operating budget from contribution volatility. Any questions, concerns?
I can't see everybody, so just with the presentation up. So if folks have questions,
Laz, I have questions. So this is Al Lebo, pension board member. Thank you, Becky. Always great to have a new valuation. I'm actually, like I said, I didn't receive this summary, and I would appreciate getting that. So if you could send that, please. My questions actually come directly from the valuation package, because that is what I had and was working with. So first of all, just to level set, I want to make sure everything that you've presented here is as of July 1st, 2021, right? Anything that happened subsequent to that over the past 10.5 months is not reflected in what's shown here.
That's correct.
Okay. So just a couple of nits to start off with. On page 12 of the package, and I don't know if it'd be better to share the package or just to discuss it.
I'm happy to share it. Let me just get it onto the appropriate screen so I can share it. Okay.
Thank you.
So page 12 of the report, or the 12th page of the PDF file?
The page labeled 12.
Okay. All right, here we go.
That one, right. So I think there's I think that part C and part E are reversed in this exhibit. So if you could just straighten that out, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, I think you're right.
Okay.
Okay, we will get that fixed. Thank you.
Okay. Skipping down to page 17, or alternatively page 36 in the assumptions, we have this amortization growth rate, 2.75%. That's something I think we may want to revisit. That was something that made a big difference when we had a lot to amortize. It doesn't make a big difference now, and I think it would be a good idea to sort of pare that back before it starts obscuring changes. So just a suggestion there. But what I really wanted to get into was really questions supporting what we're referring to as the dashboard, ways of tracking what's changed. And so this was really wonderful to get this update, and I was able to use this to fill in a bunch of the dashboard, but it did leave a few holes in what we were doing before, and that's really what I wanted to talk about. So turning to page 15. So this shows an asset roll forward. It shows, the market value of assets to start with, the contributions, the net investment income, benefits paid out, and then the resulting. And so this was on an actual basis, how the assets rolled forward. I'm wondering if you also have, what was expected when we put together the pension obligation information. So that I think went from 215.8 million to 584.1 million. And if we have that would be wonderful to be able to show side by side the actual versus the expected.
The expected just based on our interest rate assumption at July 1, 2020, without any intervening market value updates in mid-year.
Right. So when we did the pension obligation, there was a sort of, you know, single scenario, and we used that for the dashboard. We said this was the single scenario that we were expecting, and so the numbers that went into that.
Yeah, we based on the actuarial assumption, the 6.99% interest rate assumption, we expected that there would be investment income of 14.7 million.
Right.
And then, of course, we had a great banner year, and it was 63.8.
Yep.
So
right. Yeah, and I was able to pull that number from here, the 14.7, but all the other numbers that corresponding here, the contributions and stuff like that, all that went into the expected number, it'd be helpful for our dashboard.
okay.
And actually, I don't know if this is Chris or Peter, but the roll forward, the actual roll forward shown here, if you guys could just confirm that you agree that, you know, that's the way we got to the asset value we're at right now, that would really be helpful.
You can see these numbers as well in the town's annual comprehensive financial report at June 30, 21.
Okay. Now, one other thing that would be helpful, and I think this is from Chris, is the so we have the net investment income here, but if we could break out the gross return versus the asset expenses that get us to the net return, we'd like to include that in the dashboard as well.
We can help with that.
Okay. So then, and I have here, I'm turning to page 20. So this is what I was just referring to, that when we did the pension obligation bond, you put together an exhibit like this that showed, you know, how things would develop. But that went through the year 2050, and this only goes through 2040. So if we could get the additional 10 years, I'd like to be able to add that into our dashboard. And then, oh, I'm sorry. And it actually, the one that we had before actually had some more columns than this. If we could get those additional columns, I'd appreciate it. Those were the return by year, the reserve fund balance, the ADC paid from the reserve fund, and the POB debt service value by year.
Okay. That isn't information that we normally include in a valuation report. It's certainly information we can put together and maintain for you and enhance the contents of the report. But it isn't a standard part of our services, so I just want to make sure that the pension board is comfortable with our doing so, and we'd need to, you know, modestly increase our fee to cover that cost of putting together and verifying and transmitting that information annually.
Let's have a broader, Alan, I'm not sure how much you have left in terms of, you know, us being able to fill out the dashboard. Maybe if there's more, we can have a call with Becky and just kind of go over, you know, all, you know, I'm not sure if you have additional needs, but maybe we have a broader call to talk about what data elements we need, but also talk a little bit more about the cost.
Okay, I do have one more dashboard item, and then I have a couple of other small questions. So the other one is corresponding to that asset roll forward, and this sort of goes along with Perry's question. It's a roll forward of the liabilities, and it sounds like you already actually have all this information. It's just a matter of getting hold of it. But I'd like to get the actual and expected roll forward of the liability from the prior year to this year. showing all those differences that you were talking about, with respect to, census changes, benefit changes, valuation, interest rate changes, things like that, so we can see those comparisons. Okay, so the two other questions that I had outside of that, the first one is, oh, I'm sorry, one of these was already answered. But the funding amount, here it is, the debt service paid, in the pension obligation bond exhibit that corresponds to what's shown here, the debt service was shown as 20.961 million, and the debt service shown here was 17.662 million. And maybe this is a question for Peter, but do you know why there's that difference?
Mhm. Yeah, the final amount issued was a somewhat smaller amount than we had included in earlier sets of analysis. So we updated the amount to be issued based on, I think it was April 9th market values, which turned out to be better, higher than expected, so the town could borrow less. And then you got a very favorable rate as well. So the final debt service did end up being, the final amount issued was lower and the debt service on it was lower than had been included in earlier iterations of the analysis.
So Peter, when I originally presented the dashboard, you had noted that the final numbers were different and sent me a new dashboard that had these final numbers in it. Now maybe that was the final that was voted on the board, and it then changed when it was actually issued.
Yeah,
but
that was
missing.
that was a June report that Becky. I don't know if you remember. We updated our estimates in June. I think it was June 2nd. Those were not the final numbers. Those were our latest estimates. But I agree 100% with what Becky said regarding the amount that we actually bonded for was less, and the interest rate was significantly less than we expected. So that's the reason why the debt service payment is a lot less than we anticipated.
Okay.
And I can certainly send you the debt service schedule, which frankly it's level principal and interest.
Yeah.
Minor fluctuations year to year, a couple $1,000s up and down year to year, but I can send you that as well because
Yep.
that's fixed from now on.
Right. Okay. All right. So
Okay.
thank you. So yeah, Laz, I do think we have some work here to do on getting information supporting the dashboard. But I think this is I'm excited about how this fits in with what we have there, and how we'll be able to analyze what's really causing changes, and what kind of things we need to focus on in the future.
Agreed, and we'll definitely kind of follow up with a separate, either separate call or just correspondence via email on kind of how we how we close the loop on the dashboard. Anything else? Because I know we still have the demo on the pension administration system, MARC. So I'd like to move on if possible, but if folks have a question that really needs to get answered, please ask. And thank you all for your questions and comments. All right, let's move forward with the agenda and go to the demo. Thank you, Becky.
Okay, so to be clear, we're not actually going to demo the system for you, but we're going to provide you with information about what it is. So again, I'm gonna share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm of course an actuary, but as an actuary, I do a lot of pension administration for small plans, but you have a large plan, you have a lot of members, you have people working for the town that handle all of the aspects of the administration. And the MARC system is a way of providing your administrative staff with substantially enhanced and modernized tools to make their job more accurate and efficient. And I've provided just sort of a schematic. The MARC system is used by the plan administrator to handle all of the administration tasks. Estimate benefits for people who are interested in retiring, finalize their benefits, provide all of the paperwork that someone needs to complete in order to retire. It is fed directly from your payroll system so that the MARC system has up-to-date information about pay and employee contributions. It knows when someone has terminated employment so that automatically benefits can be calculated or refunds determined for the members who have terminated employment. It feeds directly data, it's too early in the morning. Let me take another sip of tea first. It feeds data directly to the pension processing, the pension payroll processing system. You do that in-house. Many pension clients have an external trustee, such as a bank and trust that handles the actual cutting of checks to retirees, but that information flows directly from MARC. And then importantly, the MARC system can include a member website so that members can go directly to a website and for themselves run estimates of their pension benefit, do what ifing, what if I retire at this date or that date, what might my pension benefit look like? How might that intersect with benefits from my spouse, from Social Security, from a defined contribution plan? Members can do self-service tasks like if they're retired, they can put in a change of address or a change of tax withholding or direct deposit change. We don't let active members do a change of address on the website because that information comes from the payroll feed. But members can go and get a copy of the summary plan description. They can go to the website and say, I want to retire now. Please send me a packet with my pension information. So the MARC system is both a calculation engine. It would be coded with all of the details about how your benefits are calculated. And you have a complex pension plan. You have 20, 25 different sets of benefits for different people based on when they were hired, what union they work for, when they retired. It's complicated. So the MARC system is that expert calculation engine. It's coded once. It's not a collection of spreadsheets. It's a formal system that undergoes rigorous testing. And the MARC system is a repository for all of the information related to the pension plan. Individual benefit amounts, any paperwork that's sent to a plan member is stored there, but it can also be a repository for the summary plan description, for copies of qualified domestic relations orders, for copies of the paperwork that a member has filled out. So it's in one place, all of the information needed to administer the pension plan. Milliman's been doing this for a couple of decades. And we have a staff of people largely in Milwaukee and then Kevin's in Denver that are dedicated to the care and feeding of this team. So this isn't something cobbled together by a bunch of actuaries in their spare time. These are dedicated systems professionals whose sole job is to maintain and update the MARC system. We've designed it so that it's pretty straightforward and easy and intuitive to use, but we back it by people who are on call to help your people understand how to use it, get trained up to use it, and are available anytime you have a question. We have a couple of public plans in Connecticut that use it, including the town of Manchester, the Metropolitan District. The city of Stamford just went live with it a couple of months ago. And by all means, those are people you should call up and find out what their experience with the MARC system has been. The closest comparator, I think, to what you want is what the town of Manchester has, which is that the MARC system is used by people at the town to help them administer the pension plan. The Metropolitan District and the City of Stamford have taken a further step. The actual administration is done by Milliman people rather than by people that work there. And we provide that full spectrum. It can be used completely on what we would call an in-house basis by someone sitting in town hall using MARC as an expert tool. But we can also completely outsource the functionality, and we can do anything in between, and we can change that at any time. So you have that flexibility. It works around what you need when you need it. Here are some of the tasks that the MARC system handles. It keeps track of everything and anything needed to calculate benefits. There are a couple of sets of benefit calculations that come up once in a while, and we've provided you with two options. We would be happy to code those calculations into the system so that MARC can handle all of those calculations, but that does cost additional amounts. And so we've provided you with a scaled back option where we don't code the system to handle those things that only come up occasionally. And two sets of those calculations. The first is when retiree benefits go up because of a cost of living adjustment. That's a once-a-year process. And the second is when a member dies before retirement or becomes disabled. Those two things particularly don't happen very often. So it's for you to choose, would you like us to code the system to handle those or not? Or maybe one and not the other. Maybe we'll have an option 1A somewhere in the middle. That's completely up to you. We're happy to do it any way you like. The member website, I think, is a significant enhancement over the experience your members have today. It enables active members or terminated vested members to be able to take a look on their own at running benefit estimates so that they can think about when they want to retire and what their options are. And they can go onto the website and do that as often or as they want. And the results of earlier estimates that they've run can be stored so that they can go back and take a look later. They can fill out forms. They can submit forms online. It's a secure website. Of course, it's a secure environment. We can have a single sign-on using their town employee credentials, or you can rest assured that whatever the members do is going to be in a secure environment that's subject to security audits on a regular basis. And we will, the system helps streamline the process of providing the payout instructions to whomever is actually issuing the pension checks, whether that's done in-house through your payroll system or if you were to outsource that to a trust company. Here's just a little glimpse. I know this is a small picture of the member website. Actually, I'm sorry, this is what the plan administrator sees. So the plan administrator has a website through which they interact with the data. They can go in to any individual's data and take a look at it and change it, add information. The Milliman support staff can also see this. So if your administrator ever has any questions or issues, we can just come along, side by side and see and help. It is used by a wide variety of public plans, so it's definitely tailored to the needs of public pension plans, which are quite different from the sorts of benefits we see in a typical corporate pension plan. So we use the MARC system for a lot of public pension plans. So it's smoothly geared to do things like handle employee contributions and the like. At any time, you can extract information either on an ad hoc basis. Suppose you're contemplating an early retirement incentive and you want to just extract how many of our active members meet these age and service criteria. You can just sort of do that on the fly. Anything that you might want to have on a routine basis, we'll just make sure it's all set up. Those reporting capabilities are just built in. That would be part of the implementation process, is to just provide you with anything you might want on a routine basis. And then if something comes up that's not routine at all and you don't know how to do it, you just call us up and we'll walk you through it. And then the member website, so that they can go and take a look at their information, grab a copy of the plan booklet, do what if and do self-service tasks. So as I said before, we've provided you with two options in terms of pricing, and we can continue to fine tune this. As we move into the implementation process, sometimes we do find that additional functionality pops up, and as you get deeper into it, you make decisions about what functionality you would like to have or not like to have, and we'll just adjust the pricing accordingly. Our fees are structured as a one-time implementation fee, which can be paid over a period of months, and then ongoing monthly license fees. Any questions, comments, concerns?
I see a question from Al. Go ahead, Al.
It's take me a second to unmute. Al Lebo, board member. I don't really have questions about the system that you're proposing here, or the fact that we need to administer. My question is more one, and I think this is addressed to you, Laz, of due diligence, or maybe to Peter, due diligence as far as looking into competing systems, competing TPAs, things like that. And then the other question I had is, if I understood the introduction here, was that Paula Kanaki or maybe other people were doing a lot of this type of work manually before. And so I guess my question is there any kind of savings offsetting the cost here from not having to do that stuff manually? So two different questions there.
Al, I'll try to answer that. Pete Privitera, board member and finance director for the town. Yeah, Paula was doing a lot of this manually. The presentation was made to the pension administration staff and HR, and Cathy Lombardi is on this call, and obviously Lori is here, who were part of the presentation. And I think it was it was a question of having information more readily available, and having the calculations done quickly, and giving that benefit to the prospective employees and retirees, that they can go online and try to calculate and see where they are, rather than having a steady stream of individuals knocking on Paula's door and saying, "Can you calculate my pension for me? I'm thinking about retiring in a couple of years." But I can back off and let Cathy Lombardi and Lori speak to it. But we were all there, and it seemed like a quite the system. And with respect to going out on a competitive basis, that's something that's up to the purview of the pension board. I think that if we were to enter into any type of agreement, we'd have to work out the issue with Milliman. As long as Milliman is the actuary for the town, then we would continue to use it. But if down the road, if a decision was made to go with another firm, we'd want to know if all that information in that database is transferable to another party, or if we still wanted to contract them, if there was no one else out there. So with that, I'll just back off and I'll let Cathy address.
Okay. Good morning. This is Cathy Lombardi, Acting Director of HR. Yes, I did sit in on the presentation that was provided, and we all discussed it as a group, and certainly saw that there were many advantages to doing the work that we're currently doing manually. One is accuracy. Two is the amount of time that staff have to repeatedly do estimates, and having the data stored collectively online in one place are just a few of the advantages. For example, with Paula now being gone, she will be doing some work for us remotely, but there's no place for her to be able to gather the data and do some of the work that she needs to do. If we had that data stored somewhere, it would be accessible for someone to be able to do that work. I'll let Lori chime in too, as she does the direct hands-on work with herself and with Paula, to speak a little bit more about the amount of time. But just moving forward, it certainly is a much more efficient way of doing the work that we do, and having it be accurate. And for example, in a situation like this where we've lost an employee now, we're really struggling, because now everything will fall back onto Lori, who has other responsibilities. So that's just a few of the obvious advantages to the system right now. So thank you.
So this is Lori Kearney, Clerk of the Board. I believe probably like 7 or 8 years ago, we looked at this system. I remember Rick and I were part of that meeting. And at the time, I think we didn't choose to pursue it, partially because of the costs involved, and also, the setup here of how we do the estimates and what employee expectations were and so forth. How we can calculate the estimates. Typically, Paula would, and she, based on an employee request, would calculate a pension benefit, and then I would review it. So any calculation that Paula would work on, I would be the second point of review before that information was provided to the employee. So it was time consuming. And I think when we provided this data on an annual basis to Cathy, to you, and to Rick, I think we were doing probably over 400 estimates, well over 400 estimates a year. And that's, Paula doing them, and then my review. That doesn't include the refund calculations we do, or the quadro work, or the survivorship benefits for a deceased Part C or D member. So there's other calculations and work being done. I'm just speaking really to the pension estimates for active employees. So we looked at this system. I don't know. We discussed this system several weeks back, even before Paula had provided her notice. So we had viewed it, and at the time, it seemed like a great way to go to modernize our process and allow employees the ability to do their own estimates on their own time, and then certainly would have impacted Paula's and my work. When Paula resigned, it seemed that much more feasible, potentially because of cost savings. That's still to be worked out, whether we if we move forward with this system, it could take 9 months to a year to get it up and running. We still have all that work to do in the meantime. Whether we would hire a full-time person who was partially working in pension and partially doing other work, or a part-timer. I mean, there definitely could be some cost savings, but that really hasn't been worked out completely. Paula's last day was just a week ago, so and it was a fairly quick decision. So we haven't worked out all those details, and so much depends on whether we pursue this system and start that process.
And this is Becky Sielman from Milliman. Just to address on a couple of the things that Pete raised, just for clarity, we'd have a separate contract for this administrative service and our actuarial services. They're not tied to one another. So if you decided that Yelena and I needed to see the door, you could continue to have the administrative services. They're not linked to one another. I will say that one of the things Yelena and I really, really like about the MARC system is that there's one press of a button and we get the census data we need to do the valuation, which is just enormous and unbelievably beneficial for us as your actuaries to be able to so efficiently receive the census data.
Well, that's true, Becky, because right now, Peter, isn't that a good portion of Tracy Clonan's time getting that information to Milliman for the valuation?
Yeah, it is, and that's a great point
Mhm.
because yeah, it does take a significant amount of time of our payroll staff to pull all that information together. So
Right.
this would be, you know, good for us as well.
And you could, you know, very easily have an annual process of providing benefit statements for active members that show them information about their pensions, what they've earned to date, what they might expect to receive at retirement, information about their member contributions. All of that kind of information can easily be provided.
Becky, would there be cost savings to us on your end because it would be using up less of your consulting time to gather this information?
We haven't anticipated a savings on the actuarial fees, but we might be able to do a little bit of horse trading. I think that if we get a clear idea now up front of the information that, for instance, that you would like to see in our valuation reports to support your dashboard, we could, you know, that is some cost to us, but if you were implementing the MARC system, there'd be some savings in terms of the census data preparation, so we might be able to kind of wash those out.
Shari, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Lazaro. This is Perry Sloan, a pension board member. And honestly, a lot of the questions have already been responded to. And even the most recent one by Al, which was, you know, potential cost savings. I know you mentioned it does make things a little bit more efficient from your perspective. But in general, you know, I really don't know what I like more about this. I think it's a really good idea. Most importantly, I think the participant experience, I think, this day and age, it's very, very important to have online modeling. So I really think it's a good idea that this is on the table. So I just want to get that out there. But on the cost savings perspective, you know, obviously Al brought the good question about, does this reduce potential fees on the actuarial work? You already answered that. You mentioned potential horse trading. And the other thing I think all is on the table is evaluations every year as opposed to every other year. So I think that's another lever that we may have. So I'd like you to think about how you might incorporate that into this, because yes, like you pointed out, I think theoretically this does make things more efficient from your perspective, from a census, which is typically probably the most time consuming part of evaluation.
It is indeed, Perry. And I'll throw one more thing at you, which is that in effect, this implementation process will serve as a comprehensive audit of what you're doing now. We will surface data issues, we will surface calculation issues or discrepancies. And this is something that auditors are increasingly looking at, particularly for a plan of this size. You know, what are your procedures for ensuring that the data being used to calculate benefits is accurate, that you are accurately calculating benefits, that you are doing things like not paying benefits to people who have passed away. You know, and so in effect, you're getting a free audit.
Thank you. And I do have one more question. There's some, you went over on one of the previous slides, which was occasionally you might have a member from the town need some assistance, right? Whether it's how to run a report, or they need to enhance some new recurring function. Are those part of the license fees, or is that some additional ad hoc cost that can get added on over time?
So any just kind of routine answering questions, helping you use the system is part of the license fee. If you wanted to undertake some significant enhancement of capabilities or something that really was out of the ordinary, we'd say, you know, yes or no, that's included or not included in the fees, and we discuss the probable cost. For instance, this is unlikely to come up with the town of West Hartford, but one of our clients changed the name of their pension plan. Well, okay, that's fine, but we had to go in and recode at several points in the system what the name of the plan was in all sorts of different payout packages and so forth. That takes some time. So we talked it over with the client, that here's the cost of that process. We're happy to do it, but it is that was not included in our standard fees.
This is Lazar. I did have some chairman of the board. I had a couple of questions. I guess first for either Peter, Lori, or Cathy. Lori mentioned that there's about 400 calcs a year. I don't know what the average time per calc is. There's a review process. Tracy's also gathering some information. So when you think about all the time that this would save, have you guys just high level, is it like a quarter FTE? Is it a half an FTE? Does the town have any sense of, again, high level?
It's Cathy speaking. We have had very high level discussion about what this would mean for the position. And we would certainly still need a person to be the touch point of coordinating and overseeing the function for the pension. We are also looking at, would we need somebody in our department because we're just down staff to supplement other functions within HR? So would it maybe be a combined generalist position with a focus on the pension and then doing other work in the HR department? But that's really, like I said, we just lost Paula. It was totally unexpected. And we have another vacancy within the department right now. So we're really feeling the pinch of a shortage of personnel. So we're looking at the whole picture. I know that doesn't directly answer the question, but that's sort of where we're at right now.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
P. Privitera, Finance Director. And I echo what Cathy says. They are down staff, and but if a decision is made to hire another individual who is going to spend a portion of the time on pension administration and a portion of the time on being an HR generalist, that portion of the time will be charged to the general fund. Only the pension administration portion will be charged to the pension fund. So there is the probability that there will be some savings to the pension fund, because again, we're only charging the time that's spent on pension administration to the pension fund. And I just wanted to point out too that unfortunately, I think this is our last meeting until when? September?
I think so, yeah.
I believe.
Yes.
So we can, I can work with Becky and Cathy Lombardi, and we can put something together with respect to number one, if the pension board wants annual valuations, I can sit down with Becky and we can renegotiate her fees on that. And also we can renegotiate the fees presented with this package, and then we can come back to the pension board with our final recommendation in September, if that's acceptable. Or I don't know, Cathy, do you need something sooner than that?
It would be great to have something sooner, just because it's a long time until September.
The only suggestion I would have then is, if we're going to move forward with an annual evaluation and we're going to move forward with this system, then I would ask the board to, authorize me or the HR director to, to negotiate a package, and then bring the final cost back to the pension board at our September meeting. But I think I would need your authority to go ahead and do this sooner than later.
Yeah, I think, I'd like to put a motion. My thought was to try to put a motion today, but, so going back to my previous question about, high level, how much time, I know you still have to hire somebody to serve as a touch point, but, 400 calcs, I don't know if that's an hour a calc or 2 hours in terms of review, but if somebody could say, look, we're going to save the pension a quarter or a half an FTE, they could do other work, it won't be billed to the pension. I think, we can say, okay, there's an offsetting cost. So, I'm not sure if we're in a position to kind of get a little bit just a more detailed answer on that. And then I did have a question about just future upgrades. So Becky, like, if you want to upgrade there's a one-time implementation cost, but if you come out with an upgrade 2 to 3 years from now, does that mean we need another one-time implementation cost, or do we think just with licensing that'll take care of future upgrades, customer
What?
support?
One time means one time.
One time means one time.
And
Okay.
that cost is coding in all of your plan's benefits, loading in all of the necessary data,
Okay.
building all of the reports you think you'll need on an ongoing basis.
Okay. And then the one question, and maybe we can still go back to sort of FT, and if not, that's fine too. But so we're looking at the cost, but we're not cybersecurity experts. I don't know what it means to have all this participant data, sort of on, I don't know if there's more data now that is going to be on their system, but I guess the question is, has the town sort of vetted the other aspects of what it would mean to have all this data on their system?
Lazaro, Pete Privitera, Finance Director. I don't think that we've had a conversation with our IT folks yet. But we do give, we have provided Milliman with this type of data in the past. We provide it to them every year. The only difference now is there'll be a direct pipeline to that information. So we would have to make sure that certain firewalls are in place, and I'm not an IT guy, but I'm sure that our IT director would have requirements. But if other communities are doing it, I'm sure that has come up, in their discussions as well. And I just wanted to point out one other thing, and I don't know if Rick Ledwith is still on the call, but with respect to reduction of the FTE and the town taking over the liability for a portion of this position, we just couldn't arbitrarily do that without the town manager's approval, and also with notification to the town council, because it's something that it's not in our budget right now to have someone who's paid out of the pension fund paid out of the general fund. So that's another little twist that we'd have to discuss with Rick Ledwith and ultimately the town council as well.
And if I could add something, this is Lori Kearney, Clerk of the Board. Lazaro, you had asked about the time it takes to do an estimate. A lot of times we've already completed an estimate, so we have an employee coming back to us saying, "Can you update it with a different date?" And so those estimates where we've already done some research and we've already done previous estimates, it can be a pretty quick turnaround time in terms of the time it would take Paula or me to review, say an hour for Paula to update it, or 45 minutes, and then similar for me. There's much more time involved when it's a first time estimate and we're doing some research, verifying data, contacting, say, the Board of Education to confirm dates and salary and so forth. And so that could, for an estimate like that, it could be an hour and a half, 2 hours for Paula to put all that together. And then my review certainly would take less than that, because I'm not actually seeking out those pieces of information. I'm just kind of confirming them. But I mean, it's at least an hour for a particular estimate. Many times employees will ask us for 3 or 4 dates. And so those can be quicker, because once you do the original one, then there's just minor tweaks to the others before we then give them the information they're looking for. But I think, just a ballpark, an hour or to 2 hours to do an estimate, depending on whether we've got anything in the file already on that particular employee.
And this is Becky Sielman. We do a lot of this work directly for smaller pension plans, and my rough ballpark for the cost of a single calculation, depending on complexity, might be $300 or $400. So if you multiply by 400 estimates being done in a given year, that gives you an idea of sort of the market value of that service being provided.
Yep, that's helpful. I guess. Go
And
ahead.
last sort of keep in mind, we're just talking about the estimates. We also are doing refund calculations, vested calculations. So there's more than just those employee pension calculations we're doing. There's other calculations that are happening, that some of which the MARC system would be able to assist with.
Cathy Lombardi, I just wanted to add something else to the discussion. We had talked about the implementation phase and how long that would take. We would need resource for Paula's role to be putting in the time to do that implementation. So whether we were to reduce that position to a half-time or whatever we determined to be adequate, I think initially we still need that position to be a full-time role for the implementation process, because Lori has other responsibilities and there would be no one in that position. Just of note.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. And I was just thinking maybe initially, you still need somebody, but there are savings down the road in terms of time allotments. So I appreciate you following up on that. Al, do you have another question?
Well, I mean, Al Lebo, board member. Peter, you suggested that you could do some negotiating as far as the valuation work and stuff like that. If we could also get some information as to what kind of FTE savings we might think were involved here. Maybe we need a special meeting or something just to vote on the results of that. But I do think it would be very helpful to have the full picture here as to how much will this system cost us versus how much savings do we anticipate from other offsets in order to really be able to make a decision here.
Yeah, I think, and look, I appreciate sort of the urgency, so I don't want to wait till September. But I do agree with Al, maybe let's find out what the negotiated fees are going to be from Milliman, what the savings are going to be there. Whether we do an annual valuation, I think that's something to think about, but I also don't want to kind of make this more complicated. But throw in, if we did do an annual valuation, what do the fees go to? If we just stay with, the current schedule every other year, but we're able to get some savings just based on going to the MARC system, that would be helpful. And then just, high level, it sounds like you're going to save, maybe not initially, but further down the road, at least a quarter to a half an FTE, just based on some of the numbers that I heard. If you could just sort of confirm that, again, not looking for initial savings, but in the future, if we can say we're going to save about a quarter to a half a person, and they're going to be freed up to do other things. Maybe there's, we still need that person, but they're freed up to do other tasks. And then as soon as you get that to us, so just in terms of options, can we do a motion via email? I think it's probably makes sense to do a special meeting, but maybe we could do all that via correspondence. I'm not sure. Does anybody know the answer to that?
I'd have to research that. And I can let you know.
Let's plan for another meeting. Let's plan for another meeting once we have all the information. Hopefully we don't want to delay things too much, sometime in June. Does that work for everybody? I think we get the urgency of the situation.
That would be fine with me, Cathy, HR. Thank you.
Okay, Peter?
Yeah, Pete Privitera, Finance Director. I can work with Becky and Cathy Lombardi on something, put something together and get it back to the board. There is another benefit to this, and that's to the employee. it's not really a dollar benefit, but it's an added value of services that we could provide them. So, but we'll try to quantify everything and get something back to the board, and then we can vote on it in June.
No, thanks, Peter. And look, I don't want to understate, so a few of us a few of us here work in the retirement industry, and I agree 100%. The value to the employee is important. Most of the folks, this is sort of bringing the plan to the, partly to, it's just kind of bringing us to where we should be. Participants should have the ability to run a calculation online. The reason that we're, at least from my perspective, the reason we're asking for some of this, I think, is just process and documentation. It's not, I think we're in spirit, we're in favor. So let's just get all the numbers, go through the process, but agree 100%. This is, there's other values, and we're not trying to quantify everything here just in terms of dollars. So I appreciate that. I know we're sort of I think, do we have enough to kind of not close this one out, but just kind of we've got our next steps here, and we'll plan for another meeting. Anything else on the MARC system? All right. I think Chris is next on the agenda. So thank you, Becky, and thank you, everybody, on that topic.
Yeah.
We'll move to the investments. Appreciate the information.
Okay. Good seeing everyone. We'll bow out now. Bye-bye.
Great, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and certainly aware of the clock, so we'll try to be sensitive here and unpack the materials as quickly as we practically can. Really, if for those maybe you'd had the chance to review the deck that we had sent out, there were actually a couple of decks, but our primary deck, the QIR label deck, which has the more topical information, was really broken down, as you'll recall, into two segments. One just related to market updates and portfolio updates, of course, and we'll touch on the highlights there. And then we continued to investigate. And I think we've talked about this with the board on a couple of occasions, and there aren't action items per se this morning to attend to. But investigate as the portfolio continues to grow, and we've got two more injections, as you know, of the bond proceeds to occur in the next couple of quarters. The complexion of the plan perhaps maybe changes, and its wherewithal to look at different types of asset classes and perhaps expand the manager roster a bit, just given the larger dollar sizes, is something I think we need to continue to unpack in our coming meetings. And again, something we don't have to decide on this morning, but just something we want to continue to keep you aware of and that we'll update you on. So I know, Lori, I have had in the past this terrible time with WebEx. I don't know why our system doesn't allow me to share. It must
Let me give it a go.
a firewall or something, and maybe just in the interest of time, as Lori's doing that. Oh, great. It looks like you've got it, Lori. If you could go to jump all the way ahead, if you would, to page 7, just quickly. Just from a governance perspective, we do want to once a year, that's it. Thank you, Lori. We just want to unpack very quickly the investment related expenses of the plan. And I know these are numbers that are probably familiar with some of the veterans on the board, but we're running somewhere on the order of 35 basis points, or a little bit north of 1/3 of 1%. In terms of investment related fees. And obviously the heavy lift there, as you see in the exhibit, is the investment managers themselves. There are custodial fees associated with principal and our advisory fee. And I think if you do the arithmetic there, you come in, if you're rounding up, to somewhere in the order of 35 basis points, which again, when we look across our broader municipal practice across New England and the 100 some odd municipal pools that we work with, I think given the complexion of the plan and its size, your fees are very appropriate and competitive with what we see elsewhere. So not an action item, an FYI for the board, and just so we've cataloged at least once a year for you, those fees from a governance perspective. I'm going to jump ahead here.
Before I do have questions on this one.
Oh, okay, sure, Al, go ahead.
Al Lebo, board member. So I just wanted to check some dollar amounts here. So we have a portfolio now that's reaching $600 million. Not all of it's invested yet, but when we're at around $600 million, I'm assuming that that means our investment portfolio costs around $2 million, right? 0.33 times 600.
And that's what the managers are being paid, yes. Correct.
Okay. And then the principal based and fiduciant fee, those are both fees paid to your company, right?
No, the principal fee is your custodian bank, Al, that's separate from us.
Oh, okay. All right. But so again, can I look at that and say 600 million times 1.1 basis points?
Correct, you can.
Okay. And I think that's like $60,000-ish.
Exactly, yep.
And per account, is that per investment fund?
Yeah, it's kind of funny the way that principal does it. It's for each of the separate accounts, there's that $500 charge, but then they group all the institutional mutual funds into a single account. So I think, I think you've got, Al, maybe something like 4 accounts. And I we've got the Barings account, we've got the 2 separate accounts, and then we've got the mutual account separate, fund account separate. So I think there's, in the principal world, 4 accounts. So I think it would be about $2,000 per annum beyond the 1.1 basis points.
All right, thanks. That's helpful. And then the fiduciant fee, that's the only fee that's being paid to your organization?
It is. Now, I will clarify for the board, you'll remember that there was a project fee associated with the work for the pension obligation bond that's not here, but in the billing period, there was a $20,000 project fee, but that's not a recurring fee. That was a one-time. So the running total for advisory services is $50,000 per annum currently.
And Chris, does Fiducient receive any other income from like the investment advisors or anything like that? Any kind of commissions, any kind of anything like that?
No, the RIA form that we have, Al, is doesn't allow us to accept any type of commissions or fees or whatnot. We're just hard dollar for services.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Actually, while we're on this slide, sorry, Chris, this is more for Peter. Peter, have we had any discussions with principals since the issue of the POBs? I'm just wondering if it's worth, look, I don't want to, if it's just kind of worth approaching them about maybe we can get a basis point or two. Just, the plan is quite different than where it was when we did the RFP. So I don't know if I don't know what your thoughts are, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, but maybe that's worth just kind of going back to them and relooking at that.
Yeah, Pete Privitera, Finance Director. Every year I sit down with the representative, Joe De Palma, and we go over the fee structure. So I'm expecting that we'll be sitting down again probably within the next few months. But they've been very, very good with respect to negotiating fee changes. So it's something I can certainly raise with him the next time we sit down.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chris. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors again. And I think, as everyone can appreciate, right, just to add on to Peter's comments, right, we're in the open marketplace, right, you get to 1 basis point, even a little inside that, we start to run into some of those, probably competitive minimums, if you will, right? We do think way up market, those, 75 percent of 1 basis point, I guess is the best way to put it, right? Is that those type of fees are out there, but we're starting to run into, those thresholds. And I would submit to the board that I think your fee construct is pretty competitive, but to Peter's point, there might be an opportunity to tighten that up even a little bit more.
I'm sorry, Chris, could I ask one other question?
Sure.
The $2 million that is paid to the investment advisors, is that the only money they receive, or do they get any kind of back end fees, front end fees?
No, that would be inclusive, Al, of the fees that they're receiving for their work, right? The institutional funds, and we report your fees, your results, net of those fees as well. When we talk about performance figures, those are netted. But no, there aren't other fees over and above what the aggregation of this number comes to.
Thank you.
And Chris, one other question, I guess, on the investment fee, since that's a big portion. Are our fee schedules, are they tiered in such a way where, you know, so after X million, the actual average fees start going down with each of these? So maybe that 33 basis points is going to go down. You know, I'm not sure how it's going to change, or maybe it already went down, but I guess if you could comment on that, on just the fee schedules themselves.
Yeah, Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors again. So it's interesting, Mr. Chairman, right? So in many cases, right, we're using institutional mutual funds, and we've kind of run to that bottom ready, right, in terms of the lowest available fee. For some of the separate accounts that you've got, right, where we begin to size up there and tier into that next break point, there may be a little bit of reduction there. But I would tell you, I don't think it'll be dramatic from where we are today, right? Because we've already tried to make the effort to construct the portfolio in a manner that is getting you to that most cost-effective construct that we can in the marketplace. That makes sense?
It does, and maybe at some point, you know, I don't, not for today, maybe we have, I don't know how we size up compared to other clients, but I know there's separate accounts out there where instead of maybe going into like an institutional share class, you know, maybe we should be exploring separate accounts, but I don't want to, or CITs or something else, so I don't want to digress.
Yep, and we're obviously doing that work in real time, right? But beside all this, to the extent that it was a more cheaper format to express that strategy, of course, we would bring that forth to the board.
Okay.
Chris, to Laz's question, page 34, I think, shows the actual fees, right? And it shows that Silvercrest is the only one where additional dollars would potentially reduce the cost a little bit. And I also think that the fees are a little bit understated because peer is shown here at 40 basis points, but they're actually 40 basis point plus this incentive, and 100 basis points is probably a better representation of the actual cost of that plan.
Yeah, Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors. That's a fair point out. I would be careful, right? Because remember when we showed you that separate peer analysis through time, and by virtue of the very strong relative work they've done more recently, that over the breadth of your experience with them, which you know now runs close to 20 years, that number ran pretty close parallel, right? What the break evens were. So it was. You're right. It's something I think to kind of be aware of, and we do run it without the impact of the performance cost. But you're right. It's something to be aware of, I suppose.
Well, we're right. So they offer either 40 basis points plus 20 bonus or 100 basis points.
That's right.
So the 100 is probably a better long-term average.
Yeah, they fair enough. Anything else on fees? Again, I do want to be sensitive to time. If we could, Lori, maybe jump all the way ahead to slide 20, just to catch the board up. There's a lot of information in the interim here that kind of unpacks what's going on in the markets. I don't think with this group that I need to spend too much time reiterating. I think what, as you all know, has been pretty tough sledding in markets, capital markets, calendar year to date, and that has certainly flowed into some of the near-time return results. You all know the reasons why, right? We've got predominantly among those concerns for investors is the changing Fed narrative and Fed policy, and trying to unpack all the implications of that. And the markets continue to try to get their arms around that and have struggled with that a good deal. Of course, throw in the unfortunate situation in Ukraine just to pile on a little bit. And on the heels of what was, as we saw earlier, a fairly strong run in the markets and the portfolios, we've had a good deal of indigestion over the last couple of months. And you see that on the marginal numbers there, near term, a little bit of relative shortfall, which we haven't had in the plan for quite some time. And that is just a byproduct of a couple of the managers, kind of getting caught a little bit, behind from a repositioning perspective, I suppose, and a little bit in the way of miscues. I don't think in the case of the managers that have struggled a bit relative to benchmark is anything that quells up into necessarily an actionable item. just yet, but it is certainly something that we're obviously monitoring carefully on the board's behalf. The longer term track record, if you can make it out there in the upper left-hand corner versus benchmark, again, net of those fees, continues to be by and large a competitive and a constructive one. And I think that the plan is kind of doing as advertised, if you will, again, subject to some of these this near-term indigestion that we've seen in markets. Bear with me for just a second and then I'll pause. Can you jump to 22, Lori, just quickly so the board can see? There it is, that one page back, I think. So there's the portfolio as of the end of March. So we have, as a reminder to the board, have completed 4 of the 6 dollar cost averaging exercises. Excuse me. You'll remember in March we broke up and 2-tiered the $54 million contribution into 2 segments, one early in the month and one later in the month, just given the volatile nature of markets. And that's something for us to maybe talk about momentarily. But you see, as consistent with the board's edict, obviously, right, where the portfolio is running essentially, right on top of the strategic allocations that you've set forth. So from an existing allocation perspective, for what it's worth, right, we're close to target and I think consistent with the board's intentions. The next DCA would be scheduled to occur next month, as you all know. And remember, just as a matter of course, the first 3 we had done toward the end of that period. So all things equal, we would have done it at the end of June in one fell swoop. I guess one question for the board's consideration, Mr. Chairman, is consistent with we did in March. Is there an appetite, perhaps, because we do expect volatility to remain elevated here near term, to replicate the construct we used for the March insertion into the pension obligation bond proceeds into the pension? Is there a desire from the board to break that into 2 segments and do it again beginning and end of month, just again to control a little bit of that entry point exposure and given volatility in markets?
Yeah, no, Chris, thank you. I was actually thinking that, based on the rationale that we used last time, I mean, I think the S&P is down 18, 19, or, kind of 18, 19% year to date. Maybe a little bit less, but maybe before, I think it's worth putting a motion forward to maybe do the same thing we did last quarter. Maybe just kind of give us a quick update on kind of where we are year to date and sort of what your thoughts. I mean, nobody's got a crystal ball, but kind of what your thoughts are, relative to the current environment and where we might go from here.
Yeah, we would, and I guess just to cut to the chase, Mr. Chairman, Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors, we would endorse again to the board that a 2-tiered contribution in the month of June makes sense. Again, it's tough to handicap anything other than ongoing volatility in the markets near term because investors, are still navigating this path of Fed policy, and those circumstances aren't intended to change. And certainly no expectations that we're going to have a resolution to the situation in Europe in the next month or so's time. And then moreover, inflation continues to run high, as you all know, and rates have been grinding higher. And those things are all here, in the immediate future. And I think will continue to probably sway markets from a volatility perspective in a somewhat elevated fashion. So we don't have crystal balls, as you all know, but we do, have mechanisms from a discipline perspective to control for that a little bit. And I guess cutting to the chase again, we would endorse taking DCA 5, which would be roughly $54 million, as you all remember, and splitting it into its component parts and doing one early next month and one toward the end of the quarter, one toward the end of the fiscal year, if you will, just to mitigate that, volatility effect a little bit.
I guess why wait till early? I think last time, didn't we just do it within a couple of days of when we voted?
I think we started it, Mr. Chairman, right after we voted. It probably occurred a week later. So if the question is, why don't we just do it phase 1 immediately, hereafter, I wouldn't step in front of that either. I was just replicating, I think, the timing of the last one. That's all.
Yeah, I think I think the timing of the last, within a week of us voting, I'm not sure what needs to get done on your end, but I would say if, I'll put a motion forward and then, kind of within a week and then for half and then the other half as regularly scheduled, which would be, I think, end of June, you said, right?
Correct.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we just go through the managers real quick and then I'll put a motion to do that. I want everybody to kind of see the latest information that we have. And then and I think we'll be in a better position to sort of put a motion forward and then vote on it at that point. And if you could keep your comments, I know Chris, so we're short on time, just kind of give us the highlights of any managers that you think are worth going into a little bit more detail. I saw some of the international ones maybe,
Yeah.
but I'll leave it up to you in terms of how we go
Yeah.
through the information as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors. If you scroll, Lori, to, I think it should be the next page is, bear with me here. Keep going a little bit more if you would, I'm sorry. One more. I stopped there for just a second, if you would, back on that previous page, just to catalog for the board. There is one manager you'll remember that is on watch, an elevated research status. That is the Harbor Strategy, the marathon team out of London that is the sub-advisor there. Not a performance issue per se, but there have been some changes to the portfolio management team. I did talk to our international equity analyst who covers that strategy on Friday of last week, and he did mention that the changes that have been undertaken over the last couple of months seem to be settling in nicely, and that team is kind of fully up and functioning again, and he has an expectation, no guarantees, but an expectation that that strategy will revert back to maintain in short order here. The balance of the roster managers, if you can make it out there, you'll see have the maintain designation, and kind of a reaffirmation to the board, hopefully, that they've earned our highest kind of research rating in terms of positioning and portfolios and people and process and all the things that we evaluate on your behalf. And don't have any concerns really across the roster in terms of injecting fresh monies into any of these strategies, Marathon included, obviously, given the circumstances of that watch. If you scroll to the next page, again, in the interest of time, I don't think we can unpack all of it, but we do catalog the individual results for the managers. I think, as the chairman alluded to, there's a couple of managers, perhaps most pronounced in the international space, both Causeway and the Vanguard International Growth Strategy, that have struggled a little bit more than has been their history near term than what their longer term track record is. So again, as you all know, we tend to give them the benefit of the doubt, knowing that there'll be these inflection performance track records as markets recalibrate. I look at the collection of active managers, and there are 9 of them in the program. If you do the arithmetic, and 7 of the 9 managers, net of their fees, since you've brought them into the portfolio, have outpaced their benchmarks and or peers. So I think that from a totality perspective, the roster is in pretty good working order. And I would, humbly submit to the board that the work you've done with that type of a batting average is pretty darn strong. But again, there are, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't unpack any more beyond just Causeway and Vanguard, and there being a little bit of pressure on their near-term results. But again, when you expand the track record and the lens there, their longer dated numbers have been very competitive. So this is, something we periodically see, as you all remember, when we get these market recalibrations.
Al, you've got a question.
Yeah, Chris, I did want to review this page because on this exhibit, we can see that Silvercrest was for the quarter, and I realize this is only a quarter of a year, but Silvercrest performed at 94th percentile, Peer at 80th, Causeway at 80th, Vanguard at 96th. Barings doesn't actually have a number here, but performed way worse than the target. Each one of these are, the non-indexed funds. These are the ones that, in my mind, are simply just leveraging leveraged investments. And so what's happening is when markets do well, they outperform. And for years and years and years, these funds have all outperformed. Now, when we have a situation where markets drop, they way underperform. And these are also the funds that have 80 to 100 basis points of cost, as opposed to the index funds that are more like 5 basis points of cost. So we talked earlier about $2 million that we're spending here. I really think we have an opportunity to reduce that to something under $500,000 and to reduce how much risk we have by heading more towards index funds rather than these, leveraged investment managers.
Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors. So I think, Al, right, there are a couple of things to unpack there. One is the discussion around the amount of active and indexing, right? Should always be a discussion from the board. I would suggest there is not a definitively right answer there. Every board has different tendencies about how much, they want to search for incremental return versus not. And you're absolutely right that you could very directionally and cleanly and directly reduce the fees of the plan by going to more indexing. And there, maybe that's, something we want to research some more. I do say though, right, remember that I don't want to lose sight of, for example, let's use Peer as an example, because it's up on the page here. They had a difficult quarter for sure. But remember, if you would go into an index there, what you would have been trading away over the last 20 years, right? So scroll over on that line since the inception there, net of fees, and look what they've added to the plan, right? That includes the shortfall they had in Q1 of this year. So it's a balancing act, I think, right? And I think the same thing for Vanguard International Growth at the bottom of the page. An awful quarter, for sure. No escaping that. No one's disputing that whatsoever. And a difficult year for that matter. But again, right, with the benefit of time, when you scroll across the page there, we would have foregone those incremental returns with an index. We wouldn't have experienced the downdraft we had in Q1, nor would we have gotten the magnitude of upside we got with the, what's been done longer term. So I would ask the board, and I know you do this, right, just to be appreciative of the totality of those manager track records. You're right. It's frustrating in a down market that some of them, given the relatively concentrated nature of their portfolios and a relatively high conviction, approaches that they take, which I think, right, is the trade-off for active management. And if we're going to pay for active, let's be active. But that tracking error sometimes, as you point out, can create indigestion, certainly in down markets. So I would submit to the group again, I don't think there's an absolute right answer. If the desire is to reduce management fees, we can do that very quickly and very easily with more indexing. It's just a matter of, are we willing to acknowledge the fact that some of these managers' longer term numbers have been accretive to the results of the plan? That's all.
Yeah, but again, that's in a market that's been very favorable. And of course, in a favorable market, taking more risk is good.
Yeah, it's fair. Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors, that's fair, Al, right? And you're right. I mean, we, on a go forward basis, we think markets on balance, right, will continue to move higher, right, on over the long haul, certainly over the life of the pension obligation bond, right? The markets typically move higher over time. But I mean, your observations are fair. So
Chris, for our meeting I think it's the next one's in September, when I'd like for us and, as a group to go over the alternative asset classes and, kind of everything that you're thinking for, us to consider. I think as part of that conversation, why don't we just take a fresh look at sort of our balance between indexing and active, and from my perspective, there might be areas where we might want to be more active, but why don't we take a fresh look at that in the September meeting?
Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors, I noted, Mr. Chairman, and I thought I saw Perry might have had a question, I think.
Perry, go
Yes, I
ahead.
did. And it doesn't need to be answered today, but it's kind of an extrapolation, or at least related to what Al was bringing up, which is, over the last 10 years or so that markets have been performing well. And, maybe that's sort of attributed to the outperformance of these particular actively managed funds. But I guess more importantly, looking forward, let's say it's a down market. Are they positioned in a certain way where you believe they would underperform against the benchmark? Or, you know, just your general thoughts around how they're positioned going forward, and whether there's any expectation one way or the other, you know, outperformance or underperformance, about, you know, how they're positioned relative to the individual index benchmark.
Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors. I think, Perry, it's a great question, right? I think I would answer it with the notion that some of the managers that have underperformed recently tend to be the higher conviction, more concentrated managers. And invariably what we've seen, right, in these periods when we've got markets recalibrating, as they're kind of reworking their thinking and positioning and convictions, right, and they may get caught a little bit flat-footed in that transition. Oftentimes that repositioning on a go-forward basis when markets settle down has been the source of a lot of that incremental return you see from them longer term. So, you know, again, right, the not the apprehension, but the awareness that we have is we continue to have, you know, confidence in these managers on a go-forward basis for sure. You see that in our ratings analysis and summaries, but you know, so I'm kind of of the mindset that I'd hate this point in their track record, right, seems to be an awful time to kind of take that bet off, right? Because we've seen in the past where they've had these momentary lapses and points of weakness that they've re-leveraged, recalibrated, repositioned their portfolios, and that's been the source of better and more stable returns versus benchmark on a go-forward basis. And to the extent we start to eliminate them some, you know, right at this point in time, we've kind of caught that knife, right? And then we're kind of trading and we're moving to maybe an index where we don't have the benefit of that high conviction approach when markets have stabilized. So I don't know, Perry, if that helped or hurt but it's just an awareness that we are all evaluating these managers, I think, as you all know, over longer time frames, knowing, right, full well knowing and aware that there will be periods in their return cycles where they're challenged, you know, versus the benchmarks. And we've seen that a little bit in Q1.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Perry Saloni, pension board member, I think their long-term returns, which again, as you pointed out, net of fees, are very, very strong.
So I think that's a great awareness, Mr. Chairman, for us to take back into your direction. You know, we'll do some of that active and indexing a comparison for you more acutely in September.
Yeah, and you know, you always are good about giving us your recommendations, but if you see opportunities to do more indexing, let us know. Or if you know, you think that in some of the asset classes where we're active, you know, just kind of bring your recommendation. Just on the funds, it doesn't sound like you're recommending any changes. I did want to ask Chris, can you just comment on our any direct exposure to either Ukraine, Russia, or Belarus? You know, particularly in the international funds?
Yeah, Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors. So I can pull the exact numbers, Mr. Chairman. We did go through that exercise as a firm right around the threshold or the onset, if you will, of the crisis. And I think the 4 managers that you had in the program all had fairly nominal exposure to Russia. So I don't think that they were particularly impactful on their results in the quarter. Where you really saw that were some of the dedicated emerging market managers that tended to have much higher weightings in Russia for a host of reasons. But I can get you the exact number here, but they were not particularly impactful to the results you saw. They were fairly de minimis exposures to Russia, all things considered.
And same with Ukraine and Belarus, I would imagine.
It's the same, yes.
Yeah. Any other questions? I know we've got a couple things left on the agenda. Any other questions for Chris from the board?
If I might, Mr. Chairman, through you quickly.
Sure.
That's for our Fiducient Advisors. Just so the folks have it cataloged, there are details in the report, as you know, for the POB, the monies, you know, the raised monies that are in the conservative fixed income. That detail is in the report. As you all know, we've got $100+ million left to spend, and it continues to be in good working order from an allocation perspective in that very conservative short-term fixed income. So that'll continue to be the draw here in the next two waves. And then to the chair's introduction earlier, to the extent that board members have the time to do it, and we can dust this off and send it back in our next meeting as well, there is a host of materials starting on page 40 in this deck that just reframe our asset allocation expectations in the markets, portfolio construction, other things that we should be thinking about, to the chair's point. And maybe Lori, if you just, and I promise in 30 seconds time here, scroll ahead one page more, if you would. One more. There, thank you, right there. So here is just a kind of a very simplistic diagram for the board to begin to think about portfolio construction wise. What we may want to do is you continue to inject monies into the program. You know, we always want to be sensitive to the number of managers and their capacity. So as you see there could be conversations, and maybe this is to Al's point, maybe maybe this is just index additions in certain places, but perhaps expanding the roster out a little bit through the traditional asset classes. International appears to be good working order. You see at the bottom of the page there, to the chair's introduction, other things that we should be investigating and at least talking about. And I know some of these things have scary monikers, but it's $700 million, $600 million. Many of your peers are doing this type of thing for the long run. So be that private capital or marketable alternatives or the like, just things that we should continue to periodically revisit and see if there's appetite for that from the board. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stop, and I know you've got other things to attend to.
Thank you, Chris. Actually, before we leave the investment conversation, I did want to put forward a motion to accelerate part of, half of the June 30th dollar cost averaging amount, and that would get invested within the next week, and then the other half under the normal the previously scheduled time frame. So I'll make a motion. And Lori, if you can go through, does anybody have any questions as to what the motion is? Okay, go ahead, Al.
Yeah, could you just clarify the timing of when we have invested the actual dates of the former investments, and what the dates would be of what you're proposing?
So the prior ones, help me out, Chris, but so normally we would invest at the end of each quarter. Now with last quarters, we accelerated part of that, and I don't remember if it was invested sort of toward the end of February, but help me out with the time frame with the portion that we accelerated.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors. That's exactly right. The first three DCAs occurred right at the end of that, relevant quarter, and then DCA 4 was done. I think once it was all said and done, it carried into very early March and was executed, and then the other half was executed at the end of that month. And I think, Mr. Chairman, you're contemplating similarly for this go round.
And so Al, within the next week, as soon as administratively possible, the monies that were scheduled to be invested on June 30th, we would invest half of those within the next couple of days, and then the other half as previously scheduled end of June.
Thank you.
Lori, do you want to take the roll on the vote?
Sure. Lori Kearney, Clerk of the Board. As to the motion just stated, Peter Privitera,
Yes.
Brittany McGilpin,
Yes.
Al Lebo,
Yes.
Perry Salonia,
Yes.
and Lazaro Guzman.
Yes.
All right, all in favor, motion passes.
All right, and Chris, just confirm when it's all done for the accelerated portion. via email, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for the presentation. Let me jump to another screen here so I can view the agenda. I believe we've got a couple of town matters. Next on the agenda, Brittany, town matters.
No updates to report.
Great, thank you. Lori.
Sure. Lori Kearney, Clerk of the Board. You'll see the remaining meeting schedule for 2022. We've got a September 19th meeting, October 17th, and November 14th. Right now, it's still a bit up in the air as to how these will be conducted, whether virtually or in person. Lazaro, are we comfortable kind of letting that pend until closer to that time?
Yeah, I think, I think if the town, this one sort of, I guess you had asked me, not to, it's pretty close to when the meeting was going to happen. But I think for the next meeting, assuming town meetings are happening in person, we should all plan for the September meeting to be in person, unless something changes. But it seems like that is the direction that the town is headed in, correct?
I have to be honest, I'm not sure, because
Okay.
initially this meeting was supposed to be in person, but late in the late last week, we learned that it could be held virtually. So I'm not quite sure how the meetings in the fall will go.
This is Shari Cantor, Mayor Shari Cantor. I think it's going to be kind of individual. The state legislature did extend or grant municipalities the ability to hold public meetings in a hybrid fashion. So I do think that it's going to be somewhat flexible. We do expect that numbers might climb in the fall, and maybe encourage committee and commissions to meet remotely. So anyway, they are allowing it to be pretty flexible.
Thank you, Mayor Cantor. So let's do this. A couple weeks before the meeting, we'll sort of connect via email and kind of see where we go from there.
Sure, that sounds good. And it sounds like we may be trying to schedule a June special meeting or something over the summer. Is that still?
Yes. Yeah, to go over the MARC system, the pension administration system.
So that's what's happening for the meeting dates. We have the minutes. In terms of, before we get to the minutes, in terms of pension administration, you'll see that we have some standard pension plan new members to enroll in the plan, both on the town and the school side. And we were working on a number of non-vested employee withdrawals that you'll see in the packet of information. Those have been processed. 2 vested interest applications to approve. 3 survivorship benefits for Part C and D police and fire members who have passed, and then 5 normal retirements to approve.
Is there anything non-standard or that warrants additional attention on any of these, Lori? Or
No, these are all standard activities. There's nothing out of the norm.
Motion to unanimously approve pension administration. If anybody objects, please let us know. All right. Sounds like everybody's in agreement. Motion carries unanimously. Do you want to go back to the minutes, Lori, or?
Sure. So then we have the minutes from Monday, February 28th to approve. That meeting was conducted virtually, and Paula had prepared the meeting minutes as the clerk for that meeting.
Motion to unanimously accept the meeting minutes. Any objections? Nope.
Okay,
All right.
motion
Go ahead,
carries.
Maureen.
Motion carries. Thank you. And then there's invoices. You'll see in your packet. So we have a Milliman invoice for the actuarial evaluation services in the amount of $7,903 and change. And for consultation services regarding a quadro and contingent annuitant factors in the amount of $626 and change. That latter part is something that Paul and I worked with Milliman on. There's also another Milliman invoice for the actuarial evaluation services in the amount of $18,000. And services related to the actuarially determined contribution in the amount of $660. And then an invoice from SilverQuest for management fees for quarter ending June 30th, 2022 for approximately $37,000.
Any questions from the board on the fees? Al, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a few questions on the actuarial valuation fees. First of all, there are two bills here, one for a very round $18,000 and one for a very specific $7,903.75. So I was wondering why one's very round and one's very specific. And secondly, I was wondering, are these, and maybe this is part of the answer, are these hourly determined, or are these negotiated in total for the service provided?
I can try to answer that, Al P. Privitera, Finance Director. They're not hourly services. We have a fixed rate for the valuation unless there's something specific that was done over and above what's in the contract, then we would revert back to an hourly service. I can, normally what I'll do is I'll take a quick look at the fee and see if it's in line. I understand your question. Actually, now that you're stating it, it is kind of strange that one's rounded and one isn't. But I certainly can go back and take one more look at this thing to make sure that they're in line. But I don't have any concerns about processing it. I will look at it, but if there is something that pops up that was questionable, I could always go back and we can always talk about making an adjustment against the next bill. But I'm not concerned with it at this point.
Well, so why then are there two separate bills? Was it that we negotiated 18,000 and then there was more things asked for that caused the additional bill, or why is that?
No, the 18,000 is just they'll bill us at increments in time, whenever they're however they're moving towards the completion of the valuation. They're both basic services. I'm not quite sure why we were billed twice on this one for one amount and one for the other. But we're normally billed for the bulk of the valuation when it's completed. I can go back and double check that $7,900 bill and forward a full explanation to the pension board.
So the other question that I had then was 2 years ago, Hooker and Holcomb did the valuation for us. Was their fee around $26,000 or was it different than that?
It's been longer than 2 years for Hooker and Holcomb. I can't recall what their fee was, but I know that they were both competitive. I don't think we were paying, anything significantly more when we moved to Milliman. I think we've been with Milliman for 3 to 4 years now, at least.
Well, yeah, I guess so you say that you've looked at these and they seem reasonable, and I guess I'm trying to understand, do we have a basis of another competitor to determine what's reasonable and what's not?
Well, we have a contract with Milliman in place. So when that contract expires, if there's an extension on it, I'd ask the board if they want to extend the contract. If the board doesn't want to extend the contract, we would go out to RFP for actuarial services.
And is that contracted for a specific dollar amount for the valuation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that's so what is the dollar amount for the valuation?
I don't have that right at my fingertips. I certainly can get that, but sometimes that there's additional work that's required, or sometimes there's additional work that's requested. And in this particular case, there is some additional work that was requested that was outside the scope of the valuation, the $626.25. I just need to take one more look at that $7,900 bill, and make sure that really should have been charged towards the actual the actual valuation.
Yeah,
because it is an odd amount.
Yeah, it just be helpful to me to know what was the standard amount and what was the extra amount.
Okay, I will certainly get that.
Let me suggest this. I think we've done this in the past. To Peter's point, I'll put forward a motion. Let's approve the payments. I mean, we have an ongoing relationship with Milliman. If there needs to, we'll get more information. We'll approve it today, assuming everybody is in favor. Peter will get more information, and if there needs to be any sort of adjustment in the future, we can proceed with working on that adjustment with Milliman. Any other questions either on the Milliman fees or Silvercrest? And the Silvercrest, I imagine is just, their standard management fee for the quarter. So nothing unusual there based on their negotiated expense. I'll make a motion to unanimously approve the invoices for consideration. Any objections? All right. All right, Lori, I think the motion carries.
Okay, thank you.
Any new business that we want to discuss? Peter, I'm sorry, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment to Chris. Chris, we're gonna need to execute that transaction by the 25th because I'll be out for a bit the end of the month and for a portion of the early June. So if we can get all the documentation by the end of this week, we can sign off on it and get it back to you early next week. Does that seem reasonable?
Chris Kachmar, Fiducient Advisors. Absolutely, perfectly reasonable. Peter, you'll see the paperwork in short order.
All right, thank you.
All right, anything else? And we'll work on getting a June date for the MARC application to discuss that. Hearing no other business or questions, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Any objections?
All right, motion carries.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. I know we went over today a lot of important topics to discuss. Really appreciate everybody's time. There's a lot of good discussion. Have a great week, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank
Bye,
you.
folks.
Bye.
Bye.